Sounds good. Let's see. Ashwin, could you mute the microphone on the particle account?
Oh,
Getting some feedback. Let's see, is that a little bit better? All right, I think we're good to go. Perfect. All right, so let's see. We are waiting for CowSwap, and then we can go ahead and get started. But I guess while we're waiting for CowSwap, what I can do is for the audience that's already here, give a quick introduction to kind of what we're doing today with the Intent-WTF space. So to build some quick context while we're waiting here for the next 4 or 5 minutes, Intent.wtf is essentially an event that we're going to be running out in Istanbul around DevConnect week on the 16th, I believe. You can actually find the Luma page linked to the announcement of this Twitter space. So if anybody here will be out in Istanbul around that time, definitely recommend stopping by. It'll be basically a sort of one-day community event where we talk about all things related to intents, sort of diving into the intent space where we're at right now, some of the emerging technologies in intents, the different utilizations of intent-centric design, as well as, of course, what we've been building at Particle regarding intent centricity. So there's going to be a lot covered at Intent.wtf, the in-person event. And these spaces are essentially meant to build context following up to that in-person event. So this is our second episode. We ran one about 2 weeks ago with Propeller Heads. Then we're running, of course, the one this week with CowSwap as well as Enso. And gotta say, I'm super excited for the episode today. I took some time researching Enso and CowSwap, of course, over the course of the past few weeks, but especially today. And I gotta say, I'm super excited. I'm impressed with a lot of what I saw. And I have a lot of questions as well, though. So I think basically the goal today will be number one, to kind of understand a more clear picture of both what CowSwap does, what Enso does, as well as the potential overlap there, as we might get into in a moment. As well as, of course, we want to bridge this understanding and this picture over to some insights and kind of gathering some opinions and some ideas regarding the intent space, and specifically how Enso and CowSwap interact with intent-centric design, how they implement it, and kind of contextualizing that with Intent.wtf. So that's kind of the main agenda for today. Let's see, we have Connor from Enso up here. Are we still waiting on Anna from CowSwap? Let's see here. I believe we have the CowSwap account in the audience here. Perfect. Okay. Ashwin, could you invite the CowSwap account? I don't believe I can do it because I'm actually I am on the browser version of Twitter on my desktop, and it works now. It's functional with Twitter Space, but it is still a little bit buggy sometimes. So Ashwin, if you could throw an invite over to the CowSwap account, then we can throw them up here. And get started.
Yeah, I've sent an invite to them.
Perfect. All right, let's see. Well, while we're waiting for that, I guess we already have Connor up here. Connor, can you still hear us? Is everything sounds good on your end?
Yeah, it's good.
Perfect. Well, while we're waiting for some of the sort of technical issues to be sorted out with the CowSwap account, could you maybe start with an introduction about yourself? We'll talk more about Enso specifically and the API and stuff like that in a moment. But from your side, could you maybe tell us about your position at Enso and maybe kind of how you got into Web3, how you got to the point that you're at today? Just like a quick introduction into kind of who you are and what you do within the space.
Sure. So I'm Connor Howe, the founder of Enso Finance. I've been in the EVM ecosystem for the last 7 years. Prior to starting Enso, I was a Solidity developer. So from the early days of 2016, a lot has changed in the ecosystem ever since then, and it's been great to see the evolution of it. And prior to starting Enso, I worked at a fully regulated and licensed digital asset bank, where I helped create a fully collateralized stablecoin, secondary exchange, multi-sigs, cold storage, hot storage, and all that fun stuff. Enso was generally created of a vision for aggregating all of the decentralized finance ecosystem within one simple and intuitive API. We're also a solver on the CowSwap side.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about sort of the intersection between Enso and CowSwap in a moment. And of course, I also want to talk a little bit more in a second about specifically, like I think Enso and you guys take an interesting philosophy to defining intents and how you sort of like conceptualize that. And I like the term that you guys used called shortcuts. And we'll talk about that in a moment, specifically how that ties into things like your bundler API and the kind of the different products you guys have. But I believe we have CowSwap here now. We're actually going to have the Anna on her account that's working. Let's see, Ashwin, if you could accept the request. Looks like there's a little bit of a technical issue. All right, well then let's kind of keep moving, and while that's being sorted out. So I guess like while we're waiting, Connor, could you tell us a little bit more about sort of Enso when it comes to products? So I guess there's two verticals here that I want to touch on, and that I kind of want to learn more about. So the first is, of course, like at least as far as I understand it, sort of like the flagship part of Enso, which is your collection of APIs. And if I'm correct, these are like mostly distinguished as what you call shortcuts. And of course, you also have the Enso app. Could you maybe start by telling us two things? Number one, what kind of Enso does and your goal at a high level, but also maybe a little bit more about the specifics of kind of your flagship product, in this case, the API.
Yeah, for sure. So Enso was actually created from a problem that we had from creating a first version of Enso. Enso started off actually as a social trading platform where anybody could create a strategy and others could invest into the strategy. It's kind of like a open yarn or eToro on EVM chains. Whilst building this, our users wanted more DeFi integrations, and ultimately there was no solution that we found to be able to integrate into other DeFi protocols easily. So for a developer as of today, if you want to integrate one DeFi protocol, you need to write one smart contract adapter, you need to write your own indexer, your own metadata service, and also go through the whole audit cycle. So you're looking a couple of weeks, even months to be able to do this. And this is generally where our API was born. So our API aggregates all of decentralized finance, tokenized and non-tokenized positions, so we can also do state changes. This is one part of the intent ecosystem that we're more pushing towards on the smart account area, as most of the intents as of today are purely token, whereas Enso is available to go into one position or many positions in one transaction. And also, for example, you can say I want to lend on Aave, borrow on Aave, then hedge your position on IPOR, all within one transaction. So high level, where we want to get to, we want to create a convenience API to enable all developers to interact with DeFi easily. One vertical of this is providing our DeFi routes into the intent ecosystem, such as CowSwap.
Gotcha, makes sense. So, yeah, I mean, I guess could you maybe like I kind of see this as like specifically before we kind of dive into the app and these different components, specifically on like let's focus on the sort of I know you guys have a few different APIs, like the router API, even like the metadata API, stuff like that. But the bundler API, and I believe this is like primarily what you guys kind of categorize under these shortcuts. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more, like you said, sort of organizing multiple different types of DeFi interactions into kind of like, I guess, one atomic transaction? Maybe that's the right word for it. Um, could you tell us more about how this works and specifically like the sort of backend implementation of this, the use cases of this, and kind of how that fits into the ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. So most of the listeners probably know about account extraction and 4CC7 bundlers. So the way that these bundlers work is saying, I would like to do step one, this transaction one, transaction two, transaction three. However, you're not able to use the return values of transaction one into transaction two. So ultimately, we had to create a bundler API that had the similar functionality of bundling many transactions into one. So you would just call our API and say, I would like to do these actions. So it could be lend on Aave, borrow on Aave, deposit on balancer pool, and you just specify your end state or your end token that you'd like, and then you get all the call data back. how we build this in the background, we have different routing algorithms, we have our own indexers, we have standardization of how to interact with protocols. So every single protocol has a different function signature. So to add to a pool on balancers join pool, Morpho is very different, Uniswap is very different. However, we've standardized this in a way that you can say just deposit. So you don't need to know the underlying function signatures to how to interact with this protocol. So you can simply call our API, say what actions you would like to do. We find the best route, the best path. We simulate this using our own open source simulator, which I know CowSwap is also using in production. It's called Temper. This is built in Rust on top of Foundry. And then we also leverage Tenderly for this as well. So we simulate to ensure that our routes can pass the expected amount out and also the gas cost. At that stage, we return you the call data, and then the user can execute that on their behalf. What's interesting with this bundle endpoint is it's available for not only EOAs, but also smart accounts. With smart accounts, such as Gnosis Safe, Safe and so forth, you're able to do state transitions. Particular protocols such as Aave are allowing you to delegate borrowing. So if you borrow, you can say, okay, I would like to delegate my borrow to this address. But protocols like Liquidity and many others do not allow this delegation. So all of this combined together creates one simple API to be able to interact with DeFi.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm actually looking as you're talking about this, looking at some of the examples that you guys have on your docs, and this is super cool. Like basically being able to say, I want to like defining a protocol, defining an action based upon like these sort of like natural language descriptions, like you said, route, deposit, harvest, borrow, redeem, all these different things, and then being able to string these together. And then, of course, I think it's super cool having that cross compatibility between EOAs and smart accounts. And then I believe I also read on your documentation somewhere, do you have your own custom smart account implementation for Enso, or did I misread that?
Yeah, we have our own smart wallet. We prefer people come with their own smart accounts. So if they come with Safe, I think the de facto standard should be Safe. However, whenever we started building this API and this infrastructure about a year and a half ago, the Safe SDK didn't enable delegate calls. If you don't have delegate calls, then the state will not be stored within the smart account itself. So we had to create our own smart wallet. Generally, our users come with zero dev wallets, patch wallets, Biconomy wallets, Safe wallets, and many others. And whenever you do make this call, depending upon the address, the from address that you specify, we detect if it's an EOA or if it is a smart account. Depending upon that, the call data you get back will be delegate calls or just a normal account transfer and approvals. It's a very convenient tool to be able to just aggregate all of DeFi. You can build strategy platforms on top of this. Yearn could be built fully just using this API itself. It's a full Lego block building of the DeFi ecosystem.
That's dope. Yeah, that's super cool. I'm looking at all these different endpoints right now, and I see these examples between the EOA and the smart wallet compatibility, kind of how that looks, the difference between that on the actual endpoint side, and then of course you also have this metadata API for things like I see one of these endpoints here to return, in this case, when specifically referencing the Enso smart account, like returning those address details and stuff like that. Could you maybe tell us about, apart from the bundler API and of course like the underlying pathfinding routing algorithms that go into some of those, could you also tell us about the external like additional API endpoints that you have? So of course, like I mentioned, the metadata API, the multi-chain API, stuff like that. Kind of these, I guess maybe you'd categorize them as like assistant APIs. Would you say that like the bundler API is sort of like the primary driver here, or kind of how would you categorize these additional APIs within the tech stack?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so we have a product that launched last week using Enso. They're a DeFi aggregation interface called Concero.io. Check them out. Really, really good team. They need to present to their users metadata. So APY, TVL, dollar value, logos related to DeFi protocols. So the user needs to come to an application, see all of this information about a DeFi protocol before they can make the choice of an execution. So by providing this metadata API, we give this full suite of DeFi information and also execution. So they can present this information based upon what the user selects from our metadata API, presenting to their users. They can then call our bundle endpoint. That stage, they will get all the call data to then give to the user, and the user can then submit it. So it's a full holistic stack to be able to build a DeFi super app. So if you can check out enso.finance/dashboard, this is our example application. We don't actually support this ourselves going forward. We're more focused on infrastructure. But everything you see on this DeFi super app, you can also build yourself within your own application. So if you want to offer one-to-one vaults, you want to offer one-to-many, you want to offer state changes, you want to even show portfolio tracking. We show balances of ERC20s, liquidity provisioning pools, and so forth. So I think they go hand in hand. The user needs to know information to be able to make a choice of execution onto a protocol.
Yeah, and then I think hearing all this, the one thing I want to understand more of is sort of like the positioning here. So like you mentioned, these different APIs combined together kind of create this tool set to enable the development of something like a sort of, like you mentioned, a DeFi super app, right? With these like highly advanced functionalities, being able to do this across multiple different verticals, smart accounts, EOAs, multiple different implementations of smart accounts, stuff like this. I think this is super cool. But like, I guess purely from this side, I know that you guys kind of typically describe it as sort of like being able to access, like for example, the tagline you guys have here is access all DeFi primitives, metadata, cross-chain, smart order routing through one API. So when it comes to like what you guys want to actually achieve and enable on an ecosystem level and an application level, typically, what are you guys trying to sort of target in terms of the types of apps and the sort of verticals of DeFi that tend to use Enso? I know you gave an example earlier, but could you maybe dive more into the exact positioning for like the overall sort of API stack that you guys have here?
Yeah, we are the gateway to interact with decentralized finance. We are the full abstraction layer that lives on top of the chain. The way that people interact with the chain as of today, they all build their own manual integrations, their own silos. We basically eradicate all of these silos, and we go right in the middle so they can interact with us and then interact with the chain itself. So for any ecosystem player, whether you're a cross-chain routing protocol, whether you're a CowSwap that wants to offer DeFi positions, whether you're a wallet, whether you're a DeFi super app, whether you're a yield aggregator, Enso can kind of give you access to the DeFi ecosystem. Our vision of DeFi itself will be hundreds of thousands of applications that will operate on all EVM chain layers. And we would like to be in the middle for all developers, all applications to be able to interact with this wider ecosystem. It's a convenience tool.
This is awesome.
Anna is also a speaker now. Great.
Let's see. Anna, can you hear us?
Yes, I think it's finally working. Amazing.
Perfect. There we go. Yeah, I was watching the our Telegram chat here. I think Twitter Spaces, I love Twitter Spaces and they're great for what they do, but they are not the most technically smooth, pieces of tech that have ever existed. There's always an issue. So hopefully it is all fixed and good to go now. Let's see. I actually just I'm seeing some pop up here. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, super well now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Now as soon as I say that, my screen is all messed up here. Okay, cool. So I guess, so what we talked about so far within the space, we've been running for about 20 minutes and we've kind of dove already into Enso, and specifically like the goal of Enso and of course these specific API endpoints. And I think like Connor, what you just said, kind of being this gateway of DeFi and existing at the center of hundreds of thousands of applications that leverage DeFi on multiple different levels, multiple different types of integrations, wallets, DeFi super apps, things like CowSwap. I think this is a super cool vision that you've just kind of created for us in a picture that you painted. So now I kind of want to shift it now that Anna, that you're here. Maybe we can kind of shift gears a little bit. Anna, could you start us with kind of an introduction of yourself and kind of your role at CowSwap and maybe your like a brief about your journey in Web3 and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I joined blockchain in 2017. And back then I joined Gnosis, and obviously Gnosis was already working on a lot of different things. Gnosis had multi-signature wallet, prediction markets back then. But also because of prediction markets, there was this need to find a solution to more efficiently trade assets that have low liquidity. And I think also back then, one issue that wasn't very discussed in the space at all, which is now very highly discussed, which is MEV, was mentioned by a few people only. I think Vitalik mentioned it already in 2014 the first time, and kind of Martin Köppelmann, the CEO of Gnosis, picked up on it and saw that there can be more sophisticated solutions that kind of can prevent these negative externalities of what was the normal transaction execution management back in the day. And so we kind of started being on the drawing board and like coming like up with different UX designs, or like generally different designs for DEXs. And it took us some time. We first worked on something that was called Dutch Exchange. It was extremely slow. It took 6 hours for a transaction to be executed. And so we kind of iterated a few times, launched multiple different DEXs, until we finally went back to the drawing board and decided, okay, we actually need to work on something that is providing a UX for users who we cannot expect to really know how to do transaction management well. And this was kind of the beginning of CowSwap, and I can dive deeper into this later. But so we started working on CowSwap, we launched it, and it was actually quite successful. And then me, together with Felix, the technical co-founder of me, decided to take this out of Gnosis, spin off, become independent. And since a year and a half, since February 2021, we are independent with CowSwap. Continuously trying to push on the boundaries of making the UX around DEX trading better and more efficient.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, I love the name CowSwap, and specifically its reference to coincidence of wants. So, I did a lot of research into CowSwap and the underlying architecture today and over the past few days. So I'm interested in learning more about kind of how you guys sort of articulate some of that. So I guess, could you get us started with a high-level overview for our audience, maybe kind of from a less technical perspective, about CowSwap, and specifically, like, number one, the goal of CowSwap and kind of what you guys aim to enable over other sort of like DeFi trading protocols, for example, or versus something like an aggregator or whatnot, as well as maybe a brief overview into how you guys actually achieve this goal and in terms of like best prices and stuff like that. Could you get us started with an overview like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, to describe it very simple, we kind of are like the search machine, of like in the like in, I don't know, like the outside world. If you look at for how do I get my best flight, Google search, like Google Flight Search or whatever, there's like all these different engines, right, that try to optimize a path to find the best possible, in this case, price for a flight for whoever is searching. And so with CowSwap, we described ourselves as the aggregator of the DEX aggregators, because with 1inch, there was already this aggregation layer existent that was able to, if a user came to 1inch and they were like, okay, find me the best possible execution for 50,000 or whatever many amount of my token, how do I get the best price? And then 1inch was already capable of splitting this trade across multiple different on-chain liquidity points in order to provide better execution for the user. And then here comes CowSwap, that is essentially sitting on top of that and is able to get even more different liquidity sources involved, because we can aggregate also different APIs that are doing this search engine optimization, essentially. And at the same time, we figured we also want to provide a solution that is really optimally protecting the user, because again, like the UX currently on Ethereum is okay, maybe for those who are like more expert or who are more familiarized with how transaction management works, but the average Joe who wants to just place a simple swap, they're usually a little overwhelmed if it comes to, oh, what slippage tolerance should I be setting? How do I protect myself against risks? Or probably they don't even know what risks are out there. And so even something that seems simple, like a slippage tolerance, is already complicated, because if I place a too low slippage tolerance, it might be that my trade doesn't get executed. If I put it very high, it can be that value is extracted from my order. And CowSwap is abstracting this away. Like usually what normal DEXs do is they create a default setting, but a default setting is rarely optimal, and it's basically impossible to get it right at the moment of the transaction submission. You need to really adjust the parameters when you're actually executing a transaction. And so what we did was basically always to put this user protection first when we make any decisions about how to develop our product. And so we decided to create this fully intent-based decentralized exchange, where CowSwap users only submit intents, which is essentially a sent message, that enables users to only express their goals. So they express, this is my sell token, this is my buy token, this is the period of order validity, and then this is the maximum slippage tolerance I'm willing to give. And then we engage with third parties, we call them solvers, that are competing on finding the best execution route for these users. And so they basically choose the best computational path on behalf of the users. And the highlight from CowSwap is really that the way how it's chosen, which solver wins this competition, is based on who of the solvers is maximizing the benefit for the user. And so, yeah, this is essentially a model that CowSwap initiated 2 years ago, and I think now it was also adopted first by 1inch, by 1inch Fusion, and this year also by Uniswap X.
Yeah, I love the model here, and I think the sort of transition to, of course, the way that you guys do it by creating this sort of expressing an intent, like you mentioned, with these different parameters that then gets executed by solvers like Enso, for example, is super interesting. And I think like the specific point here that I think is maybe worth diving a little bit further into is the different mechanisms in which like these transactions can actually be solved and executed. So like, at least from my understanding, feel free to correct me, but like the main three mechanisms of actually getting a transaction, like, you know, when a solver decides what the best path is, it goes through like one of three things, which is either you know, coincidence of wants, which is, as far as I understand, am I correct in that's like a peer-to-peer trade? And then you also have like ring trades, and then of course like direct to AMM. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about how this works, especially in regards to things like ring trades and coincidence of wants?
Yeah, of course. So basically on CowSwap specifically, and that's actually something that's still unique to CowSwap and is not yet embraced by 1inch or by Uniswap, is that so we collect essentially orders in an off-chain order book, and then we ask solvers to batch these trades together. So we have the opportunity to actually leverage existing orders in the order book to match trades against each other, and hence even optimize prices further. Because obviously, usually, if let's say you would try to settle a $50,000 trade on Uniswap, there's obviously going to be some price impact, and obviously you also pay protocol fees, and you also pay execution gas costs. And if you find a counter trade, obviously this happens more frequently on like the popular token pairs such as WETH, USDC, DAI, etc. But if you find a counter trade, the solvers are able to batch these two trades together, match them against each other, and then only leverage the excess amount, that if one order is 50,000, the other one is 55,000, then 50,000 can be matched against the other 50,000, but 5,000 is excess amount, and that one gets then settled on an on-chain liquidity pool. But that can significantly make trades more efficient, offer users better prices, and it also avoids this risk of MEV that usually is available in on-chain execution. So this is exactly what we refer to, why, and this is why the name is CowSwap, because it stands for coincidence of ones, like you said, that we are able to find these matches between different existing orders. And yeah, that's very unique to CowSwap. And what servers can also do is even like the simple example is that you have token like trader A against trader B and they are matched. But there's also way more complicated scenarios where you could have 10 different traders and maybe trader A matches B, B matches C, C matches D, and D matches A. And that's what we refer to as ring trades. So you don't only have to look at a binary order book, but basically a multi-token order book. And that's possible with CowSwap specifically at the moment. And then what everyone else also does is that you can, of course, also match against private liquidity. Some of the servers have collaborate together with market makers. And then lastly, tapping into on-chain liquidity.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So, I mean, I guess and feel free to correct me here, but like, so what my understanding from what you've told me at least is that like at the start of the user journey here with CowSwap is that initially a user or multiple users express an intention of something they want to do within defined parameters. Like, for example, like you mentioned, I want to swap token A for B and I only want this maximum amount of slippage, stuff like that. And then this then gets multiple orders get batched into an off-chain auction, which then gets put into, of course, a solver. I believe like Enso runs a solver, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, which then gets matched between either direct coincidence of wances, I guess maybe cows would be the better way to say it, peer-to-peer, or things like you mentioned, like ring trades between multiple different orders, pulling liquidity from multiple sources, or even like pulling remaining liquidity from AMMs and stuff like that. And then sort of batching all these into a single transaction, executing it on chain. And then is that on-chain execution, does that happen through a private mempool for MEV protection?
So this is actually up to solvers. Actually, at the moment, it's still somewhat centralized component. It goes through a CowSwap driver that is executing the transactions on chain. And they are currently all submitting via MEV blocker, this RPC endpoint that we have also worked on, that secures, additionally protects like any type of on-chain transaction against MEV. But we are currently working on what we call driver server co-location, which is potentially already going to be tried out in production this week Friday, which then allows servers to handle their own on-chain execution, and then it's entirely up to servers to decide how exactly they want to execute their transactions, whether they want to continue using MEV blocker as RPC endpoint or however they want to execute the trade on chain.
Gotcha. So that's actually the perfect segue, because Enso, Connor, I actually have a question for you. So of course you guys run, and feel free to correct me, of course, in this as well. You guys run like a pretty decently sized solver for CowSwap. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about like what that looks like from the side of Enso and how you guys participate in CowSwap?
Yeah, so we're one of the solvers in CowSwap. We do base swaps, but also DeFi positions. So I think one area in Intents that's made a massive improvement in this ecosystem is user experience. So simply expressing your intention of where you would like to get to. So for example, if you would like to go into Beefy Vault, a Beefy Vault requires an Aura Vault, which requires a Balancer Vault, which requires 2-3 tokens. That user experience journey will be many different approvals, many different transactions, many different interfaces. Now, with Enso being a solver in CowSwap, this user can simply just go to the CowSwap interface and express their intent to deposit into this LP position. And with us being one of the solvers, we will find the most optimal path, which will require within one transaction to buy the underlying tokens for the balancer pool, deposit the balancer pool into Aura, then deposit the Aura pool into Beefy, all within one transaction. So that's kind of our specialty within the solver ecosystem. We like to focus on DeFi itself. However, we do offer the base token swaps as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think here, like from what you guys have told me regarding, of course, Enso as kind of like one of the main solvers for CowSwap, and of course the actual architecture of CowSwap that we've discussed. The one thing that I want to do before we kind of move on to a more general discussion around intents is kind of wrap all this up into a kind of takeaway of what CowSwap actually enables for the end user through doing all of this, through enabling this sort of intent-centric interaction, abstracting away a lot of core complexity to achieve. In this case, would that be like what would the difference in terms of, like, for example, the end price for the user? Or I know you guys, I believe a number that I read somewhere was $82 million in surplus saved for users or something like that. So Anna, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about like the actual results and sort of the benefits for an end user from all this abstraction and kind of all this architectural complexity?
Sure. I think I would essentially summarize it into three core components, or like core goals that we are trying to achieve. One is exactly that we are providing not only a smoother user experience for users, but also offering better prices. And the better price comes from multiple points. One is that through the batching, essentially, we are able to give prices that are even better than when settling a trade simply on chain. This is what I explained before. If you have a coincidence of ones and you're able to match multiple user orders together, you usually have less price impact, and you save also on protocol fees and on gas costs. And this is essentially, like, when you look at the total surplus we have generated for users, this is essentially how we achieve this. And then there's also another, and of course, in general, by finding like more elaborated, sophisticated execution routes, by having the strong solver competition of like really optimizing for what's the best outcome for the user. That's one major area. I think a second area is also that we are tailoring for a specific market that other exchanges cannot tailor as well to, which is specifically DAOs. Because if you're trading from as a DAO, usually if you do votes on chain before you're able to execute a trade, it takes a long time from initial vote creation until final execution of an order. And this is something where an intent-based model is obviously much superior compared to the traditional transaction execution DEXs. Because here you're, as a DAO, you're, for example, capable of like setting a fairly high slippage, knowing it's protected, because servers will, in the moment of execution, compete for finding the lowest slippage tolerance possible, not extracting or not exposing your entire slippage tolerance that you initially said you would be comfortable with. So it opens like a door for like new types of trades that are purely governed on chain that were previously not possible because they would be too risky. And I think lastly, I would say one, or what we really see as our core mission and achievement that we are striving for, is that it is batching orders and providing a unique single clearing price, which is essentially what we are doing through the batching, is that we ensure that all orders that go via CowSwap and that are settled within a single batch, they all receive the same clearing price. And this is a way of how you can avoid MEV before even exposing it to the blockchain. Because what is causing MEV? What's causing it is that you have a lot of different price points for a single token in a single Ethereum block. And it's sometimes ridiculous for a token that's highly traded, such as USDC or Ether. You sometimes have 10% price difference in a single Ethereum block, which is significant. And This is, of course, then attractive for external parties to extract this value from user orders by essentially reordering it in a block and extracting value from it. And if you batch orders together, what CowSwap does, it's impossible. You do not have these different these price differences within a single block, and that avoids MEV. And I think this is a much sophisticated solution compared to some of the other solutions that are out there that are currently trying to reduce MEV or redistribute MEV. Our goal really is to minimize MEV as much as possible.
Makes sense. Yeah, I love it. I think from everything that of course you've told us about the sort of underlying architecture of CowSwap. Everything from sort of like the intent-centric initial interface that then gets led into solvers, which can leverage cows, ring trades, even pull liquidity from AMM, stuff like that, to eventually, like you said, through all the mechanisms that we talked about, execute trades on chain. All put together, as well as, of course, with things like participation on the solver side from Enso, and even like what we talked about in the beginning with Enso being the sort of like gateway for DeFi throughout a ton of different applications, right? Trying to be this sort of like all-in-one unified API for interaction with DeFi. I think all this put together, as we start to approach the end of the space today, there's one question that I really want to ask both of you guys, specifically surrounding intent-centric design. We've talked a lot about that today. So I guess maybe we can start with Enso. What I want to understand, and I think this is a question that a lot of us are asking, especially within the intent space, but kind of, and I'll ask this to CowSwap as well, but like, how do you see the future of intent-centric design evolving? Like, do you think that intent centricity and sort of taking an approach to interaction that is inherently based upon intents, do you think that will be the standard for all Web3 interaction? Do you think that's the direction that we're going into? Do you think that we're just, years away from everything on Web3 being intent centric? Do you think that it'll be left for specialized use cases? So Enso, kind of what is your standpoint on kind of the state of intent centricity as it is right now, and kind of the direction that we're moving into in the future as that technology evolves from your point of view?
It's a great question. Many different layers to this. Ultimately, intents are the most common sense approach to interact with the chain. Similar to what Anna was saying earlier, sky scanning. You want to find the most optimal path. You want to get to your end destination as fast as possible. You don't want to need to do many different transactions, go to many different interfaces, manage many different order flows. Ultimately, for user experience, intents need to be here within this ecosystem. Where intents are going and what they are as of today, generally they're just swaps. People either aggregate from on-chain liquidity, people start taking maybe some of their own flow, maybe they do some sex arbitrage, whatever it may be. The ultimate thing with intents is the user doesn't care. The user just wants this end state or end result. And all of the logic should be abstracted away for the user. One area that I think that intents need to look into a lot more, that we're focused on a lot within Enso, is state transitions. So tokens are only one part of this ecosystem, but state is a whole other ballgame. How do you start doing validation on state? You'll need to have individual protocols, getters for validating that state has been changed. You'll need new transaction simulation tools to verify that the state has been changed. What type of permissions are you giving to these solvers, these protocols, these intent protocols, to be able to change your state? Because it's a lot more than just a token. So I think intents are the natural progression of this ecosystem. Where it gets really interesting is centralization versus decentralization. The more traditional market makers come into this ecosystem, they're going to offer better price execution than DEXs, maybe at one stage. And the chain would just turn into a settlement layer. But intents ultimately for us are shortcuts. That's how we named them about a year and a half ago. There's shortcuts to get to your end destination. You don't care how you get there. That's just where you want to get to. I think anyone that knows intents as far as we can understand them right now, there's many different layers such as expressions. How do users express their intent? Is it defining your end destination, or is it defining saying, I would like APY, I would like to generate 20% APY? That's also a different type of intent that hasn't generally been done. You have people that are building, let's say, language models to build these interpretation layers. So you'll have one, the executional layer of intents, two, the interpretation layer, and then three, also the data layer, because the interpretation layer needs the full data layer. So where can you generate 20% APY for USDC? Where intents get a little bit scary, to be honest, is recommendation engines. So the more we go into human psychology and trying to understand based upon your previous interactions, you'll start having recommendation engines. And then if you start scanning your eyeballs using the WorldCoin and so forth, which I don't recommend doing, then it gets a little bit scary in that way of intentions. But generally speaking, I think we're still in the early days of intents. I think CowSwap are the OGs of intents, right? And they're leading the force within this area. I think we still have a long way to go to fully understand what intents are. Because intents, the word implies intention. There's so many different parts inside of this, and we're only just starting to really see the cusp of where this can go.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, the potential of just like the philosophy of switching from, like usually the kind of term that I use is like moving from sequential base level interaction with the blockchain to, like you mentioned, you have an end goal that you want to achieve. You have something that you want to do, and you just want the shortcut. You want you want to achieve it in the best way possible. And applying this throughout the ecosystem has a lot of nuance to it. And of course, this is actually a big part of like what we're trying to tackle with Protocol Network V2. Which, by the way, if anybody wants to learn more about that, we actually have it pinned on the top of our profile. You can see it on the Protocol Network account as the host. But I think like intent-centric design is a very, like you mentioned, a very new vertical within Web3. But I think its potential to shift UX, especially when being used with things like account abstraction, especially when being used with things like account abstraction, the potential there is massive, and we're super excited about that. And of course, like Connor mentioned, CowSwap is definitely an OG in the intent space, and has been kind of pioneering intents for a long time. So, Anna, I'd be also interested to hear your take on this question, kind of how you see the existing landscape of intents and your opinion on kind of what that'll look like in a year or 2 years, given kind of the continual evolution of the technology and what that'll potentially change for the ecosystem in general.
Yeah, Connor was already quite elaborate in his response. But to add my 2 cents to it, we 100% agree. We are still at the very beginning from Intense, and it's definitely also very hyped at the moment. So I think it still also remains to be seen whether it's more of like a hype that will pass, or whether it will actually find widespread adoption. But right now, if you would ask me, I think it's just Intense, extremely powerful. And it's also a very needed way of improving user experience. And I think we will probably all agree that we are not where we are yet with user experience in the space yet, in order to really obtain the mass adoption that we all hope we will get one day. And so I think the likelihood of Intense getting more adoption outside of the existing areas of where they're currently being used is highly likely. And we also received already from a few different projects requests as to like discuss more how intent could look like, intense infrastructure could look like in the future, whether there's like some room for collaboration with CowSwap on this. But even if you look into CowSwap itself, there's already so much more room for innovation than what we currently offer. Simple things that are now possible with CowSwap is that you also basically batch different intents from users together, right? Like, for example, a user wants to repay a debt and then swap the assets and use the receiving assets to stake, or they want to permit, swap, and bridge. Bridging is a huge area, right? Also for user improvement. Like, do we think that we will have a world down the line where users will have to decide that they're actually trading on Polygon or on Binance or on Ethereum or on Gnosis chain? Or will this be all abstracted away? And I assume it will be all abstracted away in order to provide the superior user experience. And for that, intents are a huge factor to make this happen, right? Because you could, for example, as a UI, as a CowSwap UI, you could just ask the user for what do you want to swap, and then you could show them the best price, but just show them the best price across all existing blockchains. And then the solvers, they could go take this intent, bridge the assets for the user, execute the trade on a different chain where you get a better price because there's deeper liquidity, bridge back and execute the trade for give the user the assets that they ultimately want. So there's definitely huge room for innovation, and I think we're at the very, very beginning of it.
100%. And the topic of like what's possible with intents, like you mentioned, just like the depth of potential here is massive. And of course, this is a big part of like what we're trying to explore with Intent.wtf, of course, with this space series, as well as with the event that we'll be hosting in Istanbul. So, for anybody here, if you're going to be in Istanbul around the 16th, then we'll be hosting the Intent.wtf sort of like community centric event out on the 16th. So definitely check that out. That is, again, on the Luma page linked to the announcement for the space today. We're also going to probably be hosting another space or two similar to the one today, following up to that. But I think before we end it off here, for both Enso and CowSwap, I'd love to hear about how both, of course, myself as well as the audience can kind of stay up to date with what you guys are doing. So Enso, could you tell us about kind of the best way to engage with your community and stay up to date with everything that you guys are shipping?
Yep, you can join our Discord, follow our Twitter, and if you're a developer looking to interact with DeFi, we also have a dedicated developer Telegram group. So if you go into our docs.enso.finance, you'll then see in the top right dev chat. Join there, ask any questions you have, whether it's about intents, whether it's about DeFi. If you want a particular DeFi route to be on CowSwap, ping us, we'll add this route, and then you can go to CowSwap and use it on their interface.
Perfect. And CowSwap, what's the best way that we can sort of stay up to date with everything that you guys are building and kind of interact with the community?
I would say to stay up to date, it's probably best to follow our Twitter account. But if you have any questions, if you want to engage with us, if you want to talk about collaborations, best would be to go to our Discord server. We have an amazing moderator who's also on this Twitter space right now called Master Cow. So this is somewhere where you really easily can get in touch with us. And then we also have a grant style program. We are currently financing a lot of different, very awesome, innovative projects built on top of CowSwap. So if you have any ideas how to work with us, how to work with Cow hooks, like any sort of integration with CowSwap, reach out. You can also just reach out on Discord, and we will point you at the right direction and have funding to support you in your innovations.
Well, perfect. Connor, Anna, thank you guys so much. This was the second episode of the Intent.wtf space series. I can never say that properly, Intent.wtf. And we will have, like I mentioned, the in-person event on the 16th. We'll also be having, I believe, another space or two following up to that over the next few weeks. So we're super excited about these different spaces and these events. We're probably going to be actually continuing them after the in-person event. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys so much for hopping on today. Amazing discussion. I think you guys are both building some incredible solutions. And I can't wait to see kind of what the future holds for both you guys as well as the intent ecosystem in general. For everybody in the audience, thank you so much for hopping in today and listening. Definitely, if you want to learn more about V2 and what we're kind of building in regards to the intent space at Particle, go to the Particle account that you can see here in the space at Particle Network and check out our pinned tweet. Also, make sure to follow Enso Finance as well as CowSwap. They are building some incredible things, and it was awesome to have them on the space today. Other than that, I think that is about it. Thank you, everybody, for hopping in. And we'll see you on the 3rd episode of the Intent.wtf Space Series.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having us.